the May 12th edition of our town hall. Before I introduce today's guest speaker, I would like to say that the Saskatchewan Realtors Association Board of Directors has been pleased to announce the appointment of Chris Garrett to the Chief Executive Officer of the association, effective June 1st. We welcome Chris and we look forward to working with her. Chris is currently the CEO of the Saskatoon Region Home Builders Association. In this role, her team won 2 consecutive National Leadership Awards. She is also a director on the board of the Saskatchewan Government Insurance, Jubilee Residences, and CN's Saskatchewan Community Board. Again, welcome, Chris. Well, I'd also like to congratulate one of our own members, Greg Bamford, for being named the recipient of the National Canadian Realtors Care Award for 2021 for his long-standing support of nonprofits in Saskatoon. Congratulations, Greg, on your hard work and contribution to the community. And now I'd like to introduce our guest speaker for today. We welcome Chris Jokel. Hope I said that right, Chris. CREA's economist who will be speaking on the MLS Home Price Index and how you as realtors can use it in your daily work. Welcome, Chris, and we thank you for taking the time to speak with us today.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Sherry. Just going to go ahead here and set up a screen share so you guys can all see the PowerPoint. And I'm going to switch here into video mode. Now, just a brief introduction. I guess I've just been an economist at CREA for about 12 years now, and I am the lead contact on the Home Price Index file. The way that we'll structure the presentation is, if you wouldn't mind holding off on any questions until the end, just in case they're answered along the way. And there's probably going to be some way you can either type them in the chat or raise your hand or just unmute yourselves and ask later on. But with that said, let's jump right in. So I'd like to welcome everyone to today's MLS Home Price Index training webinar. Our session today is going to cover a brief introduction on what the MLS HPI is, why it's the best price measure out there, and how realtors like you can use it to your benefit. And I'll also take you through a brief overview of the dashboard tool, which is available exclusively to members of participating boards. So the first and most important thing to know about the MLS HPI is that it can help you with your CMA, but is not intended as a replacement for it. And this is a point I'm going to repeat several more times throughout the presentation. The MLS HPI is a very valuable tool in your toolkit, and it's going to be a reliable and accurate baseline to help you validate your CMA. Now, as a realtor, you're already a market expert in your local neighborhoods, and the MLS HPI provides information on home prices and trends right down to those specific areas. And so this provides you with the most detailed level of information on home prices and trends, because just as every real estate market in Canada is unique, so too are neighborhoods within each market. Now, you already know this, but some of your clients might not. And some of you may have had a client maybe come to you and ask sometime in the past, well, you know, my neighbor just down the road sold their home about a year ago for this amount, so I can just probably list for a little above that, right? Now, you know, this might not be true, but how do you convince your client that they might need to adjust their pricing? Well, the MLS HPI can help by showing exactly what prices are doing in their neighborhood. They might need to price their home higher if the market has seen price growth, or in some cases, they might need to adjust their price lower so their home doesn't sit on the market for a long time. Now, when we think about the attributes of a home, like the number of bedrooms, bathrooms, the lot size, and a host of other features, how do those contribute to the price of a home? Well, the MLS HPI does the work and answers this question for you using more than 15 years of MLS system data and sophisticated statistical models. It uses all of this data to define what we call a benchmark home as the baseline for its price models, which you can think of as a virtual representation of what a typical middle-of-the-road home would look like for a particular property type in a particular neighborhood. And I'll get a little more into the specifics of benchmark homes later on. But for now, I just want to say the MLS HPI was developed specifically with realtors in mind. It was established by the resale industry for the resale industry. So while there are other competing price measures available out there, none of them are going to do as good a job for you as the MLS HPI. And we release MLS HPI data on the first business day of each month. And it uses data that comes directly from sold listings right in your own MLS system. And the HPI is a constant quality index, which provides an apples to apples comparison over time. What does this mean? This means it also enables meaningful month over month comparisons in price trends, and it can identify turning points in the market sooner than other price measures. And as I mentioned before, the MLS HPI also goes deeper beyond the usual market level stats. It goes all the way down to the neighborhood level, which is going to be the most useful for you when you're looking at market trends. So why should you even use the MLS HPI when most people are probably accustomed to using average and median prices? Well, one of the pitfalls of using averages or medians is that they are susceptible to large swings when there are sudden changes to the compositional mix of sales activity. And the way you can think of that statement is kind of like this. Let's say you take the average height of a classroom of children. And now you invite a professional basketball team into the room and you take the average height again. Well, what happens? The average height of the classroom shoots way up, but no one's individual height actually changes. Now, if you dismiss the basketball team and you measure the average height again, it drops sharply, but no one actually shrank. Now, certain institutions and of course the media frequently highlight average prices to show that housing markets are either crashing or on the verge of a bubble because of how easily they can be distorted by the composition of sales. So for instance, in early 2017, the Canadian average home price rose almost 20% in a very short period and then dropped more than 15% over the next couple months. Now, we already know this was caused by a flurry of high-end sales in the greater Vancouver and Toronto areas, entering and leaving the sales mix. But if you only look at the average price, you'd think the Canadian housing market had entered bubble territory and then crashed. And now the MLS Home Price Index is not affected by the composition of higher or lower priced sales entering and leaving the sales mix because it is a constant quality measure. And as such, it's not subject to the same volatility as average or median prices. Now, as a realtor, your main use for the MLS HPI will be to validate your CMA. However, there are other features that can help you do this, as well as other uses for the price data. So for example, if the listing that you've taken is not similar to a benchmark or typical middle of the road home, you can compare the features of the benchmark home from the HPI to the features of your listing, and then make the appropriate adjustments to your list price based on the differences in the characteristics of the two. And you can also compare price data across neighborhoods to gain an understanding of how trends are evolving in other local areas, or you can compare benchmark home features for a particular property type across different neighborhoods as well. And finally, you can also compare price trends for different property types within the same neighborhood, or compare benchmark home features for different property types within the same neighborhood as well. Now I'm going to take a look at the Hpi Dashboard Tool that's available exclusively to you as members of the SRA. And this tool, I believe you will be able to find on the member portal in the market data and stats section, and there should be an MLS HPI piece over there where you can find the dashboard. I'm not going to go into too much detail on every single feature in this dashboard tool. I'm just going to provide a general overview of what you can expect to find here. Now, the reason we created this dashboard tool was because when the HPI was first launched back in 2012, members really had no good way to access their own HPI data. They'd have to download these massive Excel spreadsheets and spend hours sifting through the data and doing manual calculations. And so what we did is we sort of aggregated all that data into this tool, which provides a simpler way to visualize and analyze the data. So on the first tab here, and you can see across the top, you have all the tabs for the different features. Let's say we want to look at neighborhoods in, I don't know, let's say Moose Jaw. And just for the purposes of this example, we'll go with two-story single-family homes and just pick some random neighborhoods from Moose Jaw. So on the first tab, what you end up seeing is just a very simple line chart, and that'll show you how price trends have evolved over time, starting in January of 2005, which is the starting point of the HPI, up until whatever the most recent data point is. And that's it. It's a very simple feature of the tool. Now, if you look at the axis, you'll notice that these are all index values, and that's the HPI. And the HPI is extremely useful for comparing price trends because you can compare any neighborhood, any property type, any area you want. But we know that realtors sometimes prefer looking at price levels. So up here near the top, there's a little toggle where you can switch between HPI and benchmark price. And if you select benchmark price, now you can see how price levels have evolved over time. And there's a little date slider here too. So if you want to zoom in on a particular view, you can do that as well. But again, it's a very simple and intuitive tool in the first tab. It's just a simple line chart that'll show you how prices are evolving over time. Now, if you move to the next tab, we're still looking at the same three neighborhoods, two-story single-family homes, but now instead of looking at a full time series, we're just comparing prices to where they were a month ago, so March to April. And if you want other selected points in time, for instance, you want to see how they're doing compared to a year ago, you can just select from the different pre-selected periods at the top. And that's it. That's all there is to this tab as well. So very simple, intuitive, again, easy to use. And on the third tab here, we included a simple data table because we know perhaps some people are more data minded. Maybe you'd like to include this table in a report for yourself or for your client. And again, you don't have to enter your selections over and over. You're still looking at the same three neighborhoods for the property type that you have chosen. We have the benchmark price data for the most recent month in the leftmost column, and then going back in selected points in history. And again, if you don't want to look just at the raw data, there's a little toggle here up at the top where you can look at percent changes. And so the way to interpret, for instance, this 10.1%, all that means is that this benchmark price right here for two-story single-family homes in central Moose Jaw is up 10.1% compared to where it was 1 year ago. And that's it. Now, the next three features of the tool were actually developed quite recently in the past few years. And it was in response to a lot of member feedback we were getting about ways that the tool could be improved. Now, the first one was a lot of members were coming into us and saying, okay, you know what? It's great that you have all this excellent data. I'm sure it's reliable, but when I take a listing and I want to use the HPI to validate my CMA, I have to go back to your line chart. I have to find, the point that my listing last sold on and calculate the percentage change between that point and the most recent data point, and then apply that percentage change to the sale price of my property, the price that it previously sold for. And then I have to do this again and again and again for every single CMA. And so that is a lot of manual math, and we thought we'd take the effort out of that. And so what we did is we introduced a very simple calculator. And the way it works is like this. In the first dropdown, you have a massive list of every single neighborhood and property type combination covered by the SRA HPI. But of course, you can always just start typing the name of your neighborhood and it should pop up. So for this example, we'll look with Palliser two-story single-family homes. And let's say I have a two-story single-family listing and I know it last sold on, well, I don't know, let's just choose October 2014. And now the previous sale price of this property, let's say, I'm just going to choose at random here, $225,000. Well, based on the specific HPI models for two-story single-family homes in the neighborhood I've chosen, and the previous selling price of the property that you input and the previous date it sold on, the estimated price as of the most current data available would be this figure right here. And again, not at all intended to replace the work of the CMA, but it is going to be a very accurate and reliable baseline upon which you can build your CMA and your list price. Now, the second last feature here was also to answer another question that many realtors had, and that was, you keep talking about a benchmark home. What does a benchmark home even look like in my neighborhood? I have no idea what you're talking about. And so, fair enough. If you don't know what a benchmark home looks like in your neighborhood, how are you supposed to make the appropriate adjustments or take the benchmark price in a certain context? And so what we ended up doing is, from the first drop down here, again, you have all your neighborhoods and property types. Let's say we'll choose, the first neighborhood, 1 and 2 story single family homes. And from the second drop down, I'm just going to choose all the attributes available in the HPI just for demo purposes. And so what you end up seeing here is, okay, this is what a benchmark home looks like for 1 story and 2 story single family homes in Adelaide Churchill. And you can see how many bedrooms and bathrooms, lot size, what the garage is, gross living area above ground, what year it was built, what the typical middle of the road home looks like in each one of these neighborhoods. So it's basically just a very simple lookup table. And the last feature I'm going to show you here was the concordance. And this perhaps is the most important feature of the dashboard. Because again, members were coming to us saying, okay, you have about 4 or 5 major benchmark categories in the HPI, but there are, dozens, if perhaps not almost 100 possible types of, style and subtype and ownership. How do I know which benchmark category my listing corresponds to in the HPI? And that's an excellent question, because if you're not looking at the correct corresponding benchmark category in the HPI, you're not going to get the most accurate and relevant home price trends and information for your listing. So it's pretty much functions again like a simple lookup table. You input the ownership, and let's say we're going to go with a 2-story split, and there's no subtype because that's for apartments only. Why don't we do something more interesting like a bi-level modified? And out here at the bottom is just a simple output that's going to tell you what benchmark category to look at based on these fields that should come in straight from the listing form. And so then you know what benchmark category you're going to want to look at to establish home price trends for your listing. So again, very simple, intuitive, easy to use features of the dashboard tool. There is a link to the help guide at the bottom right corner of each tab of the dashboard. And that'll take you to more in-depth, detailed content and tutorial videos on how to use all the features of the dashboard, even the ones I didn't cover. And in case you were wondering, yes, there is a way to export all of your saved selections across all the tabs of the dashboard. There's a small download icon, little button here at the bottom right. And then you can export everything in the form of images, so you don't have to worry about screen grabs. Or you can even export all the tabs into a PDF or a PowerPoint so that you can incorporate those into a report for yourselves or for your clients. And there is also an additional help resource available. If you go to realtorlink.ca, there is going to be a giant MLS Home Price Index banner on the landing page. And that will take you to our MLS HPI training hub, where you can find, again, a lot more resources on how to use the tool and other information. Now, before I continue on, I just wanted to make a quick note that, in today's age of the internet, for better or worse, we've all been exposed to the do-it-yourself sort of Dr. Google attitude, where it's super easy for anyone to look something up online and then consider themselves an expert. Now, every few years, we survey people who have recently bought a home or have indicated that they are planning to soon. And one of the top reasons from those who indicated that they would not use a realtor was, I can just do it myself. That said, an interesting takeaway from that most recent survey was what ended up ranking in the top 3 ideal qualities of a realtor when buying or selling a home. And that was a solid overall knowledge of the housing market. Now, the MLS HPI provides added value by giving information that you can put in the hands of your clients and actually show them what prices are doing. And this is especially valuable in times of heightened uncertainty or unprecedented market conditions, which is kind of what we're in now. You've got consumers being bombarded on all sides by information from these institutions that up until recently were putting out doom and gloom forecasts saying that prices were going to drop 18%. Of course, you have the media, peppering everyone with all, 8 to 10 news stories a day. And then this sort of gives you the opportunity as a realtor to step in and say, no, look, this is what prices are actually doing right here in your local neighborhood. And the reason you can do that is because the HPI is an advanced statistical price gauge that was developed and maintained by people with specialized skills in urban studies and house price modeling at Altus Group. And it was also developed in consultation with representatives from Statistics Canada and the Bank of Canada. And for most boards and associations participating in the MLS HPI, it is their go-to price measure when communicating with the media and their members on price trends. And it's also the price measure we at CREA use when providing price data to lobby the government or for requests from the media. Now, market level MLS HPI data is distributed to all the big banks and major financial institutions, as well as different levels of government across the country. And internationally, we send data out to institutions like the IMF, the World Bank, the OECD, and a whole bunch of other financial stakeholders abroad. And the reason that these institutions all want access to the data is because they know that the MLS HPI is internationally recognized as the most accurate and timely gauge of home price trends in Canada, bar none. Now, just getting back to the methodology of the HPI and the meaning of the benchmark home for a brief second, the models for the HPI use benchmark homes as the basis for calculating the contribution of each feature to the price of the home. But what exactly is a benchmark home? Well, essentially, it's a middle-of-the-road representation of what a typical home looks like for a given property type in a particular neighborhood. It doesn't necessarily represent an actual existing home, but instead it combines all the typical features of a certain property type in that neighborhood. And every single neighborhood and property type combination has its own set of distinct models in the MLS HPI, so it's incredibly detailed. So for example, if you wanted to obtain the number of bedrooms for a benchmark home, what you do is first collect all the sales for a certain property type in a particular neighborhood from January 2005, the starting point of the HPI, up until the time the models were developed or the most recent annual review. Then you arrange all of these sales so that they're sorted from the smallest number of bedrooms to the largest number of bedrooms. And finally, you pick the one that lands right in the middle of them. And this is called the median. And that would be the number of bedrooms for the benchmark home. And this is why we call benchmark homes middle of the road, because they are constructed from attributes that fall in the middle of the range of all these home sales. And other attributes for benchmark homes, like the number of bathrooms, living area, and lot size, are calculated in the same way. And once all these characteristics have been obtained to build a typical middle-of-the-road benchmark home, the models use this information to determine how each attribute affects the price. And that's as much detail as I'm going to go into on the methodology. If you want some reading material before bed to put you to sleep, you can access a detailed methodology document via the link to our MLS HPI reference materials at crea.ca/HPI. Now, we've already touched on why the MLS HPI is the superior price measure. And now let's look at some illustrative examples. So these are the major price measures currently available at the national level, and they've all been indexed to January 2005, which is the starting point of the MLS HPI. The average price is the most commonly quoted measure, but as we've already covered, it's also the one that displays the most volatility. Now, Teranet National Bank has a house price index, not to be confused with your home price index, and it follows a similar trend as the MLS HPI, but you'll notice it does so with a lag. And this is because Teranet's house price index uses land registry data, which is based on closed sales. And we know the time between when a sale occurs and when it closes can be 1 to 2 months, which means if you're using the Teranet house price index, you're looking at trends that are already up to 2 months old. And Statistics Canada also publishes their own price index that attempts to measure prices for new builds. It's that sort of orange line at the bottom there, but it's kind of difficult to discern any meaningful trends or turning points from that index. So if we just focus on benchmark prices, let's start with price trends for the board, then drill down to a major area, and then keep going on to the neighborhood level. And to keep things simple for these examples, we're just going to stick with 2-story single-family homes. So you can see the average and median price follow the same general trend as the benchmark price, but with more volatility. If we look at the average price on a month-to-month basis, it becomes difficult to distinguish any useful information on turning points because of that constant up and down movement. And if we zoom in from the overall board to a major area, we see more volatility in the average and median prices. And that's because as the sample size of sales activity gets smaller, it becomes easier for a handful of high-end sales to distort averages and medians from one month to the next. Now, these movements are not reflected in the benchmark price because it is a constant quality comparison of prices. And once we get all the way down to the neighborhood level, you can see how the diminished level of sales causes extreme volatility in the average and median price. If you look at the, I want to say almost seismographic pattern and magnitude of some of those month-over-month changes, as a realtor, how can you accurately inform your client on price movements in their local market if you're using information based on such unstable trends? And if we move to a neighborhood that has even fewer sales, we see even more volatility is introduced to the average and median prices, which are now rising and falling by more than 80% in some months. Now, this isn't reflective of what's really happening with prices in this market at any given time, but without looking at the benchmark price, the real price trends are obscured by this massive volatility. And finally, if we move to a neighborhood that typically sees the lowest volume of sales activity relative to other neighborhoods in the area, any semblance of price trends completely vanishes from the average and median prices. And you'll also notice that there are breakpoints in the average and median price data. And that's because there were some months when there weren't any sales. And without any sales, you can't even calculate an average or median price. Now, the MLS HPI remains uninterrupted because, number one, it uses a moving window to sample the data, obviously with much higher weighting given to the most recent months. And number two, it can also group neighboring areas together as long as they exhibit similar price movements for a particular property type. And it's in smaller communities like this where the MLS HPI benchmark price really shines through. And so now that we've covered the advantages of using the MLS HPI over other price measures, let's just quickly take a look at how you can apply the MLS HPI to a new listing. So in this example, the property was originally purchased by a client in July 2012. There were significant renovations completed on the home, and then it was sold in April 2015. So the table shows a select list of characteristics, both for the benchmark two-story home and for the listing. And in this example, we're looking at a home that is actually very similar to a typical two-story home in this neighborhood. So if we look at what happened with benchmark prices for two-story homes in this neighborhood between July 2012 and April 2015, and you can, of course, generate this chart yourself using the performance over time feature that we reviewed on the dashboard tool, the line chart. So we can see that there was a small downturn early on, but prices did pick back up, and over the whole time span, there was a decent amount of price growth. So just to recap, this home that was purchased in 2012 and sold in 2015 had significant renovations completed during that period of ownership. Now, the benchmark price for two-story single-family homes was up about 7% in that time. If we look at what happened with the actual sale price over the same period, we find that it was up 16%. Now, why would the sale price for this home exhibit more growth than the benchmark price over the same period if its attributes were all very similar to the benchmark home? Well, the answer lies, of course, in the renovations completed during that period. If we look at the listing form from when this home was sold the second time in 2015, we find that it had new interior paint, new exterior paint, new carpeting, new hardwood floors, and the addition of an extra bedroom on the main floor. So taking all of that into consideration makes it easier to understand why the price of this home would have appreciated at a higher rate than the typical or otherwise benchmark home in this neighborhood. Now, as realtors, obviously you understand the value that these improvements are going to add beyond the price growth for what is otherwise a typical home. So now let's take a look at an example of a listing that is not similar to a two-story benchmark home in this neighborhood. So this home was originally purchased in July 2007, sold nearly 4 years later. No significant renovations made during that period of ownership. Now, instead of taking a listing that's almost identical to a typical middle-of-the-road home in this neighborhood, we're now looking at a relatively smaller and older home with fewer features compared to the benchmark. So looking at the trend for two-story benchmark prices from July 2007 to June 2011, we see that large decline and subsequent rebound from the financial recession. And after trending kind of sideways and a bit lower for about a year, prices began to rise again. So over the entire period, we have a modest amount of price growth. So going back to our listing example, this property bought in 2007 and sold in 2011 had no significant work done to the home in that time. Now, the two-story benchmark price for this neighborhood went up by about 6%. And the actual sale price for the listing was up by, a similar 2.5%. So in this case, we're looking at very close changes in price, even though the listing had very different features from the benchmark home. The main difference here is that the actual sale price of the listing was much lower than the benchmark price of a typical two-story home in this neighborhood. And based on our comparison of attributes from the earlier slide, we know this is because the listing represents a home that is smaller and has fewer features than the benchmark home. And in general, this is going to mean adjusting the benchmark price downwards to reflect those changes. Now, I just wanted to make a quick note on the two examples I showed you. While there are many instances where the actual prices and price changes are going to line up almost perfectly or very close to the benchmark, I intentionally chose examples where they didn't, because that better demonstrates the capability of the MLS Home Price Index. So for instance, it would have been super easy to just cherry pick two examples where, the price of two homes in real life, appreciated at a value, at a percentage change very similar to the HPI, and, where their prices came in within $1,000 of the benchmark. And I could have said, well, would you look at that? It's your one-click solution to doing your CMA. The prices of homes in real life are always going to line up with the HPI. But I felt like that kind of would have been not only misleading, but not an educational example of how to use the HPI. Because your value in knowing how to use the HPI is going to lie in your ability to understand how certain upgrades are going to add more value or dissimilar features might require a price adjustment. Now, the benchmark price does provide a very accurate and reliable measure upon which to base your list price, but every home is unique. And the HPI, again, is not intended to replace that work of your CMA. Now, just coming home on a few final points, sometimes it can be useful to focus not on benchmark prices, but actually on the benchmark characteristics. So for example, let's say you have a client who really wants to live in a two-story home, but they want to shop around and see what they can get in different neighborhoods. So they might come to you and ask, what am I going to get for a typical two-story home in the neighborhoods around this area? And you can answer that question for them using the benchmark characteristics feature on the dashboard tool. So it's easy to see that two-story homes are much larger and have more features in the first neighborhood compared to the other two, which could also partially explain why they are more expensive. Now, your clients might also tell you they really want to buy a home in a specific neighborhood, whether it's to be closer to maybe specific schools or closer to family. They might be flexible on the type of home they're willing to buy, or if their situation has changed, they might not qualify for the type of home that they were originally considering. Now, you can present your clients with a similar comparison showing typical characteristics for different property types within the same neighborhood. So in the previous table, we were looking at the same property type, two-story homes, across different neighborhoods. And here we're looking at the same neighborhood, but we're looking at different property types within that neighborhood. Now, I do understand and I do appreciate that we've covered a ton of ground in this webinar, especially if this is your first exposure to the HPI. You can access a copy of this slideshow and more via the link to our in-depth training on using the MLS HPI at crea.ca/HPI. And that will take you to the MLS HPI training hub that I showed you earlier. Now, just before I open it up for any questions, I did want to thank you all very much for taking the time out of your day, and I do believe it's, I think, lunchtime over there, to go through this training session. If you have any further questions after you've had time to go away and familiarize yourself with the HPI, please do be sure to check out those added training resources or contact your board first. And if there's any questions that they might not be able to answer, they can always pass those up on to me. With that said, I'd like to open it up for anyone who has any questions right now. And I don't know what the best format will be. You can certainly type things in the chat or raise your hand, and yeah, we'll take it from there.
Thanks, Chris. It's Sherry here again. So yes, just if anybody have any questions for Chris while we have him on the line, you guys can either type them in chat, or if you are able to unmute yourself and speak, go ahead. I can't see anybody except for still the screen, so I can't tell if anyone's got their hand up.
Just stop the share there.
So Noel Jeremiah says, can we add benchmark homes into the Matrix CMA tool?
I guess that's a good question. I suppose that would be more for the administrative or IT staff who manage the Matrix tool. I'm not quite sure what the Matrix tool is. I don't have access to any of those resources from my end at CREA.
I don't know if we have any staff on the line or not. So other than Leah. Leah, do we have anybody other than you online today?
I think it's me and Gord.
Okay. Can we put that as a question back to the tech team that could get back to Noel about that?
For sure.
Okay. All right. We have any other questions? I always feel like I'm making people type really fast if they have things, but if not, I'm sure we can get a list of questions back out to you, Chris. And you had mentioned that there's other avenues for us to access some education on this. So our association's aware of that, and they can share all those links and areas for us to find that.
Perfect.
Right? Okay. That would be the other thing, Leah, maybe to get back out, because I'm sure there's a lot of people on the call that would like to get people in their brokerages more educated on this as well.
For sure.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you very much, Chris. We appreciate you taking the time out of your day as well to help educate us a little bit more on this home price index.
No worries. Thank you very much for having me.
No problem. Okay, so while we're on the line, I'll just see if anybody else has any other quick questions we could answer, since we're done before 1 o'clock today. Otherwise,
I'll stay on for a couple more minutes just in case someone's typing something out.
Absolutely. When we have these town halls, usually it's kind of just an open floor if we have time at the end. So I'm just checking to see if anybody else had any other association type questions while we were on the line. Give them a minute or two. We'd mentioned earlier that and you guys have all seen the memos out, so the new CEO will be starting on June 1st. I believe that CREA has a Instagram interview with Greg Bamford tomorrow afternoon that'll be aired live, talking about getting involved in your community. Okay, so Karen says, thanks for the info today.
Sherry, it's Stephen here, our local CREA rep. If I can have 1 minute, please.
Sure.
Awesome. Thought I'd jump in. Great job, Chris. Thanks for the excellent information. For those of you that are broker managers, broker owners, CREA is having its spring broker forum on June 3rd. And if you go on to Realtor link to the CREA site and look under events, it's a $65 registration fee, a virtual event. Great time to kind of assess what's happening and what's coming from a broker's perspective. And there's also the day before, if you're registered, virtual rooms and stuff with sponsors and exhibitors. So if you're into exhibitions online, I'll be careful how I say that. If you want to check out the exhibitors, you can do that when you're registered before. Just go on to Realtor link onto the CREA area and check out the coming events. And there's a link under there. And I'll try and post something on their SRA page later today as well.
Thanks, Stephen. This is, I think, their second one of those, because I attended one back in November, I believe it was, and they're doing them twice a year now. But definitely excellent information if you guys are able to join in on it. I'm super excited. It's May. Everyone's out selling houses, and nobody's got a lot of questions other than about coming soon advertising, multiple offers, and all that fun stuff, right? I'm glad we got this many people on in the lunch hour in May.
Yeah, this is a really good turnout, actually. It's great.
Yeah. Okay, well, if nobody else has any other questions, then I guess we'll let you go, Chris, and I guess we can end the meeting. So everybody can get back out to selling houses. So thanks, everybody. We'll talk to you all later. And if anybody has any questions, you guys know how to find us.
Perfect. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Sherry.